It began in 1965 when a Swedish engineer, Sten Gustaf Thulin, began to create the first plastic bag for Celloplast, a company that sold cellulose film. It was this year that Celloplast obtained a U.S. patent for the t-shirt bag idea and eventually the design for all plastic bags. Celloplast was certainly not the only company that wanted in on plastic bags. During this time, Mobil Chemical, also known as ExxonMobil Corporation, a company that focuses on creating products in the petrochemical industry, pursued a policy on the plastic bag packaging patent, and by the 1970s, ExxonMobil was producing their own plastic bags, along with fuels like gas for cars and chemicals like petroleum and lubricants. ExxonMobil went on to introduce the plastic bag to America, and in the late 1970s, the bag made its debut at checkout lines throughout American grocery stores. But with the rise of the plastic bag, customers were concerned about the negative environmental impact it had. Plastics are made with polyethylene, a tough, light, flexible synthetic resin which is found in beverage containers, cleaning products containers, shopping bags, pipes, and wood composites. It's very lightweight and has good resistance to organic solvents. Products like plastic that are made with polyethylene living in the soil can result in poor absorption of water and nutrients. The longer plastic is exposed to the soil and water, it releases chemicals like polyethylene that can contaminate the water that we drink and the soil we grow crops from. And even so, it takes 1,000 years for the plastic to break down. Because plastic is so durable and lasts long, they were cheaper to buy than paper bags. Companies like Safeway and Kroger, two of America's largest supermarket chains, made their transition from paper to plastic in the early 1980s, but the negative impact was still evident. Even marine animals are affected by polyethylene waste. Turtles, whales, and seabirds mistake plastic for food, and these animals feeding off this plastic can result in painful injuries or death. By 1985, 75% of plastic bags dominated checkout lines throughout America, increasing to 80% today. For such a harmless product that helps people carry their material goods, the impact of plastic bags in the environment worsened throughout the years.
People like to talk about the great ocean garbage patches, and when you hear about them, right, you think of these sort of huge floating islands of, plastic trash and tires and whatever, right? And it's not really like that. The garbage patches are really just areas of the ocean where the concentration of plastics is higher than in other places. But, if you were to sort of sail through the Great Pacific Garbage Patch or the Atlantic Garbage Patch, you would actually see much. You would occasionally come across an old discarded fishing net, or sort of a plastic buoy, or something. But most of the plastics in these so-called garbage patches are actually microscopic, and so people actually discovered them almost accidentally when they were looking for other microscopic organisms, and they were sort of dragging their nets through these areas and looking under a microscope. They would see just a lot of plastics. So we call them garbage patches. And it is true that the concentration of both macro and microplastics is higher than the rest of the oceans, but it's not like you're sailing literally through a sea of garbage.
Other garbage debris has been hard to get rid of. The need to depend on the ocean to store garbage is still happening. Take a look at New York City for a moment. There is no way to store the 12,000 tons of waste city residents produce each day. There is no landfill or incinerators to depend on. About 7% of New York City's waste consists of plastic films such as plastic bags. But it costs New York City $290 million in taxpayers' dollars just to move garbage waste to another community. Brooklyn College professor of Earth and Environmental Sciences, Brett Branco, feels that people don't reuse bags because they are cheap.
Well, I do a lot of research on water quality issues, mostly in the urban waters around New York City. Plastics have been around for quite a long time. I think people don't realize how long plastic has been around, probably since the beginning of the 20th century. So we even had them in the early 1900s, but it wasn't until after the World War II when plastic production really increased, we started to make, just about everything with plastics. And it was even to the point where in the 1950s, in Life magazine, they had a big article about the throwaway lifestyle in America. So you can save time by not having to do dishes and silverware and stuff like that, because you can just use all plastic and just throw it away when you're done with it, right? So we started making a lot of it, and then we just started throwing it all away. We're pretty good at inventing new things, people are, and then we find that they're extremely useful, but we tend not to think so much about the consequences of these things that we invent, right? So, plastics are extremely useful, right? Like, you couldn't imagine life without plastics right now. If you just sort of look at what you wear and what you use on an everyday basis, everything has plastics in it. So, plastics aren't a bad thing. We shouldn't be ashamed to have invented plastics and to be using plastics. But the problem is just that we've become so, plastics are so cheap that it's just easy for us to just kind of throw it away rather than reuse it. The consequences of all the plastics that we've been throwing away for decades wasn't really well known until recently. People just weren't really paying much attention, I think, in general, right, to all the plastics. But I think the turning point came when people started realizing that plastics broke down into these little sort of microscopic size pieces that could enter the food chain, and that they are everywhere in the world's oceans. And so, they're ending up in our fish and in our oysters. They absorb contaminants. So there's been a lot of sort of recent research on plastics in the environment and the impacts, but surprisingly not a lot around New York City. So my lab has been involved with groups that are just starting to look at sort of how much plastic is in the waters around New York City, and where is it going? Is it getting into the shellfish and stuff like that? There's been some recent research that sort of indicates that the microplastics sort of interfere with the reproduction of oysters, or that can have an impact on larval fish, so at the early growth stage and stuff like that. It's thousands of tons of plastics, right? And some of the estimates right now are that there are trillions of individual pieces of plastics in the oceans. Not around New York City, right? That's sort of worldwide, right? But they're not like big pieces that you necessarily notice. A lot of it you wouldn't even notice it unless you looked under a microscope, and then you would see, like the little beads and the little fibers that come off your fleece jacket and stuff like that.
These types of plastic carry a chemical called bisphenol A that is found in hard plastic like water bottles, dental devices, baby bottles, and eyeglass lenses. Bisphenol A is also a divider for canned food, which helps separate the food from the metal of the can. But the impact it has on humans is deadly. People at high risk to BPA could develop diabetes and heart disease in adults. In 2010, researchers from the Peninsula Medical School found a change in men's sex hormones that is associated with BPA, saying that at times bisphenol A can act as estrogen. Even babies are in danger. In fact, babies are more prone to develop prematurely since babies eat from plastic bottles that holds this chemical. But bisphenol A can be avoided. To reduce the amount of bisphenol A1 intakes, it is recommended by consumer groups to eat less canned foods. Also, products that have BPA-free labeled on them are safe to buy.
People aren't quite sure exactly what impact these plastics are having in the environment. Like the big pieces of plastic, the macroplastic, we know that can get into the digestive systems of, like the famous case is the albatross chicks on Midway Island, where the parents sort of feed the chicks bottle caps and cigarette lighters and stuff like that, and it sort of fills up their guts and oftentimes contributes to their death. The micro stuff, we're still trying to figure out exactly what impact that's having. So what we do know is that microplastics adsorb other pollutants. So we just don't know exactly how much of those other pollutants are getting inside organisms because of their ingestion of microplastics. So it's sort of like an active area of research, but you can find them in almost all sort of, sea life these days that you look. Over the last few decades, right? I mean, I think our plastic consumption has did nothing but increase. However, the good news is that people are now kind of aware of the issue, and so there's a lot of efforts to try to reduce the amount of plastics that we throw away, so that it doesn't end up in the oceans. And B, there's some interesting work going on. For example, there was a teenager from a European country, I think the Netherlands or Denmark, who's trying to create something that will clean the plastics in the oceans. Sort of solar-powered, plastic filter that you can sort of drag out into the deepest parts of the ocean and let it just sort of passively remove plastics. Whether that's going to be effective or not, I guess we will see. But I think that the problem will maybe hopefully start to get better now that people are sort of thinking about it and trying to think of ways to sort of fix the problem. There's something called the International Coastal Cleanup, and it's usually in September, where you just get people to come out to the beaches and clean them up, right? And as part of that cleanup, you have them sort of inventory all the different kinds of trash that they find, and it helps to raise awareness. So that's sort of one thing, right? But there's also been sort of on the legislative end, microplastics have been banned as an ingredient in personal care products. So you used to find a lot of microbeads in things like skin cleansers and things like that. Now we're replacing the plastic beads with things like ground up walnut shell and things like that, which are less harmful to the environment. New York City recently tried to ban or at least tax the use of plastic bags to try to reduce the amount that wind up in the environment. So there's a lot of sort of efforts at both trying to reduce the amount we use through laws and regulations, but also to get people more aware of the problem through coastal cleanups. And then, like I mentioned before, people are trying to invent things that can help remove plastics from the environment. I don't think it's ever smart to ignore environmental issues right now. One positive thing that has come out in the last few months. So, I mean, we know that the new administration has sort of played down the possible dangers of climate change, the impacts of climate change, and are threatening funding to continue to study the issue. But at the same time, I don't know that a lot of people are aware that there are in Congress there's groups of Congress people that are forming coalitions to try to keep the emphasis on climate change, keep the funding for climate change research, keep government involved in trying to find solutions for our climate change problems. And these are not just politicians from any one particular party. They come from all different parties and different political backgrounds: Republicans, Democrats, conservatives, liberals. So there's hope, right, that we'll continue to address our climate change problem.
And with that hope, as a society, we must strive to focus on these issues that a majority thinks is not worth wasting time for. We must encompass ourselves with these harsh truths and continue to fight against these environmental issues. This problem will still be here, and plastics will still be part of the American lifestyle. However, educating ourselves and slowly making an impact to eliminate this footprint is the start to a better, cleaner world. This comes with time, and it may not happen in our lifetime, but we must preserve the home that will be your child and their children at some point in the future.